Welcome to the Narcissist Slayers podcast with your hosts, Hope Jay
and Lynn Catalano.
Every episode, we focus on recovery from narcissistic abuse. We talk about topics that we believe will help people to identify signs of abuse, learn strategies to cope, and most importantly, how to heal and move forward from narcissistic abuse. We are both survivors of narcissistic abuse ourselves, lawyers, and one of us is an author.
Well, thank you, Hope. My book, Wrecking Ball Relationships, How to Identify, Live With, or Leave the Narcissist in Your Life, is available in many places, including my website, lynncatalano.com.
Because we have been in your shoes, we know how difficult this journey can be. That is why I founded the Center for Hope of Western New York, a nonprofit organization which provides education, support, and advocacy for survivors of narcissistic abuse. You can find out more about the Center for Hope at centerforhopewny.org, and all donations are gratefully welcomed and tax exempt.
Please follow us on X and Instagram at NarcSlayersPod, and also on Facebook, TikTok, LinkedIn, Spotify, and YouTube, the Narcissist Slayers Podcast. You can also email us directly with your questions at narcslayers@centerforhopewny.org.
Welcome back to the Narcissist Slayers. I'm your co-host, Hope Jay.
And I'm your co-host, Lynn Catalano.
And today, our podcast is going to be focusing on why co-parenting with a narcissist is a myth. And this is something that I deal with every day in my law practice when people come to me and they are separating from a narcissistic partner and they're in court and they're the attorneys for children and the judges and the other attorneys are pushing this co-parenting joint custodial situation, saying that it is in the best interest of the kids and that everybody should get along, and it is. I mean, that you can't argue with that.
Right. That would be the best case scenario.
Yes.
Right?
You can't argue with the fact that it is in the best interest of children to have two parents who can get along and talk to one another and resolve differences and be able to make decisions jointly. I mean, in an ideal world, everyone would have a lovely co-parenting joint custodial situation. Right. But as you and I both know, and the people who are listening to our podcast already know, this is not possible with a narcissistic partner or somebody who has these sorts of traits, because they don't have any interest in co-parenting. No. Their interest is to continue to push their power and control agenda.
Yes. And
if they have a lot of access to you in a joint custodial situation where you're continued to have to try to negotiate things and work out all of these things and make all of these decisions jointly, it puts you back into a position where you're constantly having to work with this person who has made your life a living hell. Yeah. And if you don't have a good attorney who has tried to safeguard you to limit your communication, even in a co-parenting situation, then a lot of times you're going to find yourself in a constant level of stress where they're still using the same tactics, you're still being triggered in all of the same ways, and you're not getting anywhere. You're just going round and round and round and round because they don't have any interest in reaching a joint decision. Yeah. Their interests remain the same, and that is to win. That's, power and control. That's, I really don't care what you have to say, we're going to do it my way kind of thing. And it's a really disheartening, very difficult place for people to be. Yeah. Because, you get these agreements in family court or after a divorce, and you think to yourself, oh, it's going to be easier now. But yet you have this joint custodial situation where the expectation is to co-parent, and the narcissistic partner kind of lords it over you. Because when you are trying to set limits or boundaries and you're trying to take a step back, and then they'll throw it back in your face, well, that's not co-parenting. Oh. So it's actually something that I think it's a really difficult situation and a very difficult challenge for people who are trying to set good boundaries moving forward, when it's the proverbial push that you're getting in these situations from all the other people involved. Well, you should just co-parent, right? I mean, you should just be able to co-parent. And it's not possible with somebody who has narcissistic traits.
So let me ask you, what would you say to someone who came to you, and perhaps they were a client of yours, and they said to you, I'm trying my best, but at every opportunity, my ex uses the situation to manipulate our child or manipulate the situation to make them the somehow a better parent in a better light, like to diminish whatever they're doing.
Yes. So, I mean, that's exactly it, right? So it tends to become a very long, arduous road when you have been set up to co-parent with a narcissist.
Right.
And, what I would say to people is you want to get really good, strong, experienced legal advice before you enter into these types of agreements, because there are ways to shield you from the constant back and forth with somebody like this, even when it has been, there's been a joint custodial designation, okay? Even when there is this whole idea that you're going to continue to co-parent with this person.
Right.
There's things that can protect you even in that situation. And those are the kinds of things that a really experienced family law attorney and somebody who understands these dynamics can make sure are in your agreements.
Right.
But Lynn, I want to talk about, why co-parenting with a narcissist doesn't work. Okay.
Yeah.
So I know that did you have like a few things that you wanted to bring up?
Well, I wanted to talk about when you're dealing with your ex, but I want you to know, using the term high conflict person, I think that we all have a lot of high conflict people in our lives, even if they're tangential, even if they're work people or other familial people, okay, that we don't see often, but they are high conflict. So this is just 5 easy tips on how to deal with a high conflict person. So number 1 is always maintain your high emotional intelligence, right? And when I talk about emotional intelligence, I'm talking about really just pausing and listening reflectively and really measuring before you respond. Number 2, don't take their bait. It's so easy. You want to react. Don't do it. Number 3 is stay calm. Number 4, don't react. Do not react with anger. And number 5 is don't assume that your ex will include you in parenting decisions.
So yeah, those are all really great tips, I think, from the perspective of how to deal with somebody in a situation where you're forced to co-parent. So there, the way I think about this is there's the preemptive things that you can do to make sure that when you get out of family court or you finish your divorce, that the agreement that you have, your custodial agreement, protects you as much as possible, even when you've agreed to joint custody or, the co-parenting thing has been thrust upon you and you've been advised by your lawyer that you should agree. And there's reasons why, you might get that advice. In fact, I will give that advice at times when I think that that's the way that it's going to resolve. But the other thing is, how do you deal with it in practicality, right?
Yeah.
How do you deal with it in practice once you're out of the courts and you're dealing with this person on a daily basis and trying to live out this co-parenting agreement? So I want to talk about, first of all, I want to talk about why co-parenting doesn't work. And it doesn't work for just the basic kind of reasons that we talk about all the time on this podcast, is because your partner is not interested in reaching joint decisions, okay? The basic premise of co-parenting and joint custody is that you're gonna try to reach these joint decisions, that you're gonna have these discussions, that you're gonna be able to say what you think, and then that this person's going to say what they think, and then you can both take that, and process that and come back to the table and then reach a decision that takes into account how everyone feels. That's not happening when you are trying to co-parent with a narcissist, because they don't have any interest in how you feel at all. They're not willing to take what you have to say into consideration, even though the court order says that they should, right?
Yep.
So, and they're throwing around the court order, and they're always throwing around the court order and saying, and a lot of times they'll flip that around and make it seem as though you're the one who is not willing to co-parent because you're trying to set a boundary on how much you're allowing them to manipulate you on these things. Yeah. Okay. So it gets very confusing, and it gets very murky and very complex how to manage these things. Okay. And so once you recognize that you're not going to reach these decisions the way that you would if you had a partner that was not disordered, once you come to that belief and you accept that that's not going to happen, then you can kind of approach this in a very different way. Okay. So I tell people, even if it says co-parenting, joint custody on paper, that what you're going to be doing in your life when you have split up with a narcissistic partner and you have children, is what you're going to be doing is something called parallel parenting.
Okay. So what is parallel parenting?
Okay. So parallel parenting is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, right? It's like you're side by side. So this requires a person being, like I said, being able to accept that you don't have any control over what's going on in their home, but also they don't have any control really over what's going on in your home. Okay. So all of the little things that people kind of want to get involved in terms of the parenting decisions, you give up on trying to discuss those things, and you kind of accept that what goes on in dad's home is how dad is going to parent, and what goes on in mom's home is how mom is going to parent. Okay. And a lot of times I find that it's the moms that have a really tough time with this, because dads oftentimes are doing things really differently than we as moms would do. Maybe they're not adhering to bedtime or a schedule, or they're feeding your children chicken nuggets instead of a healthy meal. Or they're, coming home with clothing that is, maybe isn't the clothing that you would have put them in to dress them to school. As long as, these things don't reach the level of neglect, okay? It becomes a problem if they're not getting their homework done with them, or, they're not being bathed, or they're not being fed at all. I mean, obviously I'm not encouraging people to just ignore those things. But if dad or mom is doing something in their house that is just not the way that you would do it, what I encourage people to do is just adapt this parallel parenting kind of a theory in your mind, and that is, what goes on at dad's house is how dad's going to do it, and what I have control over here in my house is how I'm going to do it. So it's kids will adapt. They will adapt. They will understand that the rules are different in mom's house than they are in dad's house. But you're not going to have this sort of co-parenting ideal where, for example, the child does something wrong, and you want to enforce a consequence in your house, but then it's time to go to dad's house. So you say, Dad, will you enforce this consequence that I implemented over here because Johnny's grounded and I wanted to be grounded over the weekend, but it's your weekend. Okay. When you're a co-parent in a co-parent situation and you have a good relationship with that person and you want to work together, then of course you're going to enforce what's going on over there and they're going to enforce what's going on over here. Right. But that's not going to happen with a narcissist. They're not going to have your back. They're not going to support you in those things. So you have to let go of the fact that it's not going to happen. You can only enforce what's going on in your home, and you have to let go of what's going on in their home. Okay. So it's exactly what it sounds like. It's parallel parenting. And most of the time, these joint custodial arrangements, they really only require conversations between parents when it comes to the three major things. What's that? It's health, the children's health, so it would be their physical health and welfare, their education, so anything related to their education, and their overall general welfare. Okay. So I mean, religion also is a part of those things. If religion is something big in your family. Okay. So again, health, which would include physical health. I don't think I've said mental health before. So physical and mental health, education, religion, and in general, welfare of the child. Okay. So those are the major decisions that you would have to come to some agreement on. But if you're parallel parenting, then you're not going to come to those agreements on the day-to-day kinds of things.
So what happens when one parent, either one, adds a new partner into the mix? How does this change parallel parenting?
I don't think it changes it at all. Okay.
Okay.
I think that, you know, when you adapt this sort of thinking, that, you know, you're not going to have the kind of relationship I think that most people hope to have when they split from a partner. Like we all have this idea that we're going to be these great co-parents. We're going to share birthdays together. We're going to maybe share holidays together. Right. We're going to, you know, like I'm saying, do these back and forth kinds of things.
Right.
But when you're parallel parenting, that's not happening. A lot of times, again, in parallel parenting, people are using parenting apps. So people, these are very, very high conflict situations, Lynn. So people are not even talking to one another. Like you're not having in-person conversations. The access schedule is either to school, so pickups and drop-offs are at school, or it's curb to curb. So there's no communication between the parents at those pickups and drop-offs.
What about if little Johnny plays a sport?
If little Johnny plays a sport, both parents can be at that sport. But, you know, it's generally that they're going to be separated. They're not going to be having any contact with one another while they're there. Wow. So we go into sort of we take great pains to keep you apart as much as possible. Yeah. Even when, you know, it's on paper, it says that it's joint custody and there's this expectation to co-parent. Now, one of the things that I see a lot of lawyers do that I don't necessarily think is a great thing to do in these situations, because again, I promote parallel parenting.
Right.
I think parallel parenting makes the most sense, that you are separate as much as possible, that you make your own decisions in your own houses, and you stay out of each other's, you stay in your lane.
Right.
Okay. If it comes to these big decisions and they have to be discussed, again, parenting apps, and either one of you could still retain the right to go into court if you can't reach an agreement. Now, something that I see happen a lot of times in these high conflict situations is that a court will recommend something called a parenting coordinator, or that the people, that the litigants, the parents go to what's called joint co-parenting counseling. Okay. And again, I don't think that's a great idea when you're dealing with a high conflict person, because it forces you back in the room with either a parenting coordinator, and that's somebody that's either appointed by the court or somebody that you agree to work with, usually a lawyer or maybe a mental health counselor, who's supposed to mediate these conflicts. But what I find happens is that the narcissist, the person who wants to retain the control, uses this against the other parent and forces you back into these rooms where they can then have these conversations and force you to continue to, talk to them and work out, and then turn around and say, well, see, they're the difficult one because they don't want to co-parent with me.
This sounds an awful lot like our podcast a month ago when we talked about why couples counseling doesn't work. So same reasons.
Yes.
Same reasons why people who suffer from narcissistic personality disorder don't see anything wrong with them. That's why they never want therapy for themselves.
Right.
So same things.
Yes. But it becomes there's more on the line here because there's a court order. But there's also a court order. And these orders, they have to be followed. And when I just had a client today, when there's a provision in the order that says you must go to co-parenting counseling, or you must work with a parenting coordinator, it forces you, like I said, to get back in the rooms with these people that first of all, we all know you're not going to reach a mutual decision because they have no interest in that. So it's like you're kind of spinning your wheels and you're forced to have to interact and relate with them when it's really not in your best interest to do that. The parallel parenting track is what's in a person who has been abused by a narcissist and who is trying to separate from a narcissist. You're trying to protect your peace. Yeah. You're trying to protect your moving forward in your life, not being forced to have to talk to this person every damn day about every little thing, when we all know that, you're not going to reach a decision. It's not going to be a good time. They're going to continue to abuse and manipulate you in those conversations. So, a lot of times, and we've had other, we've mentioned this in other podcasts, but I always tell people, less is better. Less is the way to do it. And, I preface this by saying the only way to win with a narcissist is not to play. The less engaged you are, the less, you're being forced to have to interact with this person, the more boundaries that you can put around yourself, and whether that be, through your own work with, a coach or a mental health counselor, or, however it is that you're doing that work, but also you want your court order, your parenting agreement, your whatever it is that you reach in court, you want it to reflect that those boundaries are in existence, so that the other person can't manipulate that situation.
Okay, so let's say your client is doing this with their narcissist, okay? They have the court order, they're putting into place all these great boundaries and protections for parallel parenting. And then the narcissist knows, they know your buttons, and they're going to push them. And what happens when they start saying to your child or children, mommy or daddy, whichever the other parent is, doesn't want me to be there, so I can't be there. Or whatever the manipulation is, they start dropping those little hints of poison into your child. So what do you recommend?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I think that's what breaks a lot of people, is that, you see that your child is being used as a pawn. They come home, and this is heartbreaking. It really, really is, because, not only are they not afraid to do this, they have no care or concern about the consequences of poisoning your children against you, or again, this is the sort of turning themselves into a victim. I do this, but I can't because your mother says I can't, or your father says I can't. Right. So, I mean, most of these orders have provisions in them that say, that parents can't discuss the case with their children, that they shouldn't be talking about litigation with their children. Most of these orders have things in them that say things along the lines of, you can't disparage the other parent. You can't talk negatively about the other parent in the presence of the child, or, have third parties do that. Now, yes, do I put those clauses in every agreement? Absolutely. Is it easy to enforce those clauses?
No.
Not so much.
No.
Right? So, it puts you in a really difficult situation when you know that your child is being used in this way. So what I would recommend is, if your child is old enough, that you get your child into counseling. And if this is, if you do have joint legal custody, and your narcissistic partner will not agree, because this is something that I see all the time. You see your child suffering, and children who have a parent like this suffer. They suffer a lot. And the same parent, the parent who is intuitive and empathetic and wants to help the child, is like, what can I do? And it's like, you need to get your child in counseling, because they need support to help to learn how to deal with all of this stuff. But usually what ends up happening, not all the time, is that the narcissistic parent won't consent. And if you have this joint legal custodial relationship, then you cannot enroll your child in counseling without the other person's permission. So this then becomes another power struggle. This is worth a modification petition, though. This one is worth, talking to an attorney and finding out whether you can enforce your current order, or file another petition to force him to agree to get the child in counseling. Because it never ever looks good. I tell people this all the time. It never looks good to not give consent for your child to go to counseling. So, that's one of the things that I would say. Get your child into counseling, get support. The other thing that I tell parents, Lynn, all the time is that I know it doesn't seem like it right now. and I'm talking to anybody out there who's going through this. I know it doesn't seem like it right now, but when your kids get older and they have more of an appreciation for the other parent and the kind of person that the other parent is. Right now, they're probably, their vision and their perspective is clouded for a lot of reasons. Yeah. But what ends up happening is as they grow up and they see, the abuse for what it is there are natural consequences to this kind of behavior. And in my opinion, it's called karma.
Well, I just want to caution people when this is happening, please don't take it out on your child. Please don't feel that it's coming from your child. Right. Show them lots of patience. Don't put extra pressure on them. They're already getting pressure from that narcissistic parent. And just keep the lines of communication open with your child. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, this sort of a thing is very difficult on kids as well. Yeah, it has, it's a lot for children to adjust. Yeah. For when their parents separate, it's even more difficult, I think, when parents can't communicate. Yeah, and a lot of times there's good reasons for parents not communicating, but it's tough for kids.
I think parents should always put their kids first, and whatever the issue is. I know that's unrealistic when it comes to this type of divorce. However, I'm speaking as an adult child of a narcissist. My father never put me first. So kids know that. It stays with you. Yeah. So please.
Yeah. And I always tell people, all children really need is one sane parent.
Yes.
and because people, they get so concerned and so upset, of how this is impacting their child. And it is, I'm not disputing that, but you have to stay the course.
Yes.
Be the same parent. You make sure that your child is getting what they need when they're with you.
Yes.
And, you stay the course.
Yes. So we hope this helped you with this particular topic. What are we doing next month, Hope? There's something interesting coming up.
Yeah, we're going to be interviewing Jennifer Sturgeon and her book, Refining Rust.
Local attorney and author.
Yes, and she's written a book about people who have suffered trauma in their childhood and how it may prevent you from going forth in your career and really going after your career goals. And so she's kind of given people some tips and some inspiration about how to turn your trauma into strength, really.
All right.
Yeah. So looking forward to it, and
tune in next month, please.
Yeah. And we'll see you next month on the Narcissist Slayers.